folks, and welcome, welcome, welcome. Such a nice night. And I keep seeing people that I haven't seen in a while. And, softball and so on, there's lots of things going on in Oxford tonight, but I don't think there's a better show going on than you're going to have right here, and I'm not kidding. This should be, the controversy has already begun. Some of the debate over who was where and what was here. We do have some photo evidence, and that's no fun. It isn't much, as just talking it over. But at any rate, we do have a great program, and we, as you know, we do conduct a business meeting first. And we conduct it pretty fast, though. So our secretary missed a great meeting that we had in April. And so substitute secretary Grace Stevens, but I'm sorry, I want to introduce, make sure you know all the officers over here. I'm going to start with Linda Paulson over here. Linda Paulson is the trustees, and Carol Russell, who's our, Carol Russell. Corresponding secretary, but that's a big word, corresponding. And Barbara Bogie, the treasurer, and Jeannie Peterson. Oh, and our vice president, Hannah Starr. And the town and village historian is here. She's not a member of the board, but she's certainly very important in local history. Vicki House is here. So we have various people who are on the board and so on. I want you to know. So at any rate, the person I'm going to, Grace Stevens, is sitting right here, another trustee. And he's the person I'm calling on to sub for the secretary for a brief report on the excellent program we had in April. So, Greg, can you give us just a minute?
Yeah, Fred's right, it's going to be brief. One of the privileges of being an officer is Fred will come up to you and say, were you at the last meeting? And if you say yes, he says, okay, you got to do this. So, we had, the program last time was Nancy Bromley, and she spoke about her father-in-law, who had written a book called Clear the Tracks. And he was a gentleman who started as shoveling coal at the age, I think, of 14. For the DL&W, and worked his way up eventually to the point where he was an engineer for many, many years, living in Binghamton, became a councilman in Binghamton, and ultimately wound up on the National Railroad Safety Board, and was a participant in investigating a number of large train accidents that occurred across the country. So, very interesting man, very interesting story, and very short report.
Thank you. That was perfect. It was an excellent program, a very interesting story, very well presented by Nancy and Vicki, who helped out with the slideshow that went along with it. Our treasurer, Barbara Bogie, will report on our financial situation.
Treasurer's report through May 31st, 2013. Balance on hand, March 31st, $2,018.93. Receipts, dues, $450. Donations and gifts, $105. Museum sales, $12. Total receipts, $567. Expenditures, NYSEC, $354.43. That's for 2 months. Erie and Niagara Insurance, $417.66. Village of Oxford, the water and sewage bill, $73. OACS graduation gift in memory of Lyle Walsh, $250. Curtis Lumber Company for our archives project, $317.45. That archives project, someone other than me can tell you more. They're doing a lot of work that's needed in the train station. Total expenditures, $1,413.04, leaving a balance as of May 31st, $1,172.89. And we have a savings account called the Band Pagoda Fund, $1,188.80. We have another savings account called the Special Fund, $10,008.65. And we have 3 certificate of deposits, one for $8,993.22, another one $20,243.41, and another one, $1,428.44.
Thank you very much, Barbara. And, without objection, the chair will accept both reports as accurate and
Over here, sign it.
no corrections. Thank you. And thank you. Okay, the next person, I have President's remarks. I have 2 or 3 things. Barb mentioned the depot. It's an ongoing project over there. The whole thing is going to take about a year. It's not a huge building project, but we've been putting these platforms in the back room so we don't get flooded again. That's part of the project. We're moving things around, replacing the floor in the office, which Grace Stevens is doing and saving us a lot of money. And so that's what the physical part of it. The other part of it is the actual archive reassembling, re-identifying, and eventually putting on a computer. But it's a slow process. We want to do it right. That's the part that's going to stretch it out probably for another year. But there's a lot going on over there. And on the nitty-gritty work, if anyone wants to work on any Thursday, we're open every Thursday. If you show up, we can give you something. You know, we'll find something. If you like to paint or sweep or wash or move things around, we'll have something for you all summer long. Any Thursday afternoon, 1 till at least 3. I have a request. There's a yellow pad in the back of the room. If you are not on our email list, if you are a member or not, would you put your name and email on there so we can send things out and save money rather than this, $1 a piece from the envelopes? We really appreciate that. I have a comment about the band concert. It's not exactly certain if we're going to have it there on August 1st or August 8th. So just be alert. If you go to the concerts, listen to Francis. He'll tell you the week before. And I guess if you're on the email list, we'll tell you on the email too. I have one other thing here. The Shenango County Civil War Commemorative Committee is sponsoring a really good bus tour to Civil War battle sites in August. That's really the first, I think it's August 5th through August 8th. And I'll put out some flyers back there. But it's a good deal, and it really is a good deal. And Darla Race, one of Oxford's own, who's a wide reputation as an excellent hostess. This will be the person conducting the tour. And so that'll be in the back too. So at the end of the meeting, don't leave. We want you to look around stuff and look at the things in the back. T-shirts are on sale. And did I tell you we can reduce the price 50 cents? We can't do it?
T-shirts are $15.
No, $12.50 we had.
$12.50?
Yeah.
Okay.
But, okay, there's still $12.50 then.
I'm trying to make a buck.
Well, I'll tell you, that there is,
Build the confidence.
anyone wearing an Oxford Historical Society t-shirt, would you stand up and face that way, please? Okay? You know, so they are popular. They are around town. They're growing. It's a fad. It's a trend. Don't be the last one. We have an expression that you're not really well dressed until you're wearing an Oxford Historical Society t-shirt. So, I was trying to save you 50 cents, but treasurer wasn't. All right.
There's one up there you can probably move.
We have an excellent program tonight.
There's 2.
Oh, you got.
Oscar,
Alright.
it's, these are good seats. These are good seats. We have several townships represented here today, Coventry and Norwich and as well as Oxford and McDonough. And so it's a diverse group here. Another reason I want you to stick around at the end of the meeting, talk to people and renew friendships and so on. As I started to say, this is an excellent program. These 2 people, Bob Marshman and Anna Stark, really know Oxford, and a lot of people in the audience really know Oxford too. But by the way, Lawrence Wilcox was going to do this, And he's not doing it, and it's my fault because I did not reconnect with him and get it set up and so on, so it was all my fault. And he's a busy man, and got down to nitty gritty, and he just couldn't do it. So we got, fortunately, a great replacement. And these two people are very complementary to each other because they're slightly different in age, and they know. This all going on the tape, is it? Mr. Takahashi?
We can edit it.
You can edit this later, I hope. All right, so, but they're going to take you on a tour on the west side of Oxford. This is the West Side Story. This is another turn around the block. The businesses, the stores, the people who were here in the late 40s and 50s and maybe up into the 60s. But that era which most of us remember fondly, and some better than others. So, but I'm going to turn it over to Bob, and Anna's going to be first. So, ladies first. Okay, thank you. Anna, start.
Ladies first.
Point out that Bob is older. I'm the younger one. Anyway, we were doing this program about Oxford in the 50s, and last time we did it, we just kind of named a few stores and said a few things. But this time, I thought I would really try to get into the history and when things were and who owned them. And it just got so in depth, and I probably talked to about 10 of you in this room because so many of you had a little piece of it, but you didn't have the big picture. And then once you start talking to more people, you realized what was where. The block that gave us the most problem was the Navy Island block. And when we get to it, I'll tell you why. But anyway, in the 50s, I was in elementary school. But I grew up on Taylor Street, and I just thought Taylor Street was a really lovely street then. It was either all kids or older people, and the older ladies liked to sit on their porch and they gave you cookies and stuff. They were just really nice people. And on Taylor Street, you could play on that wooded area between Taylor Street and State Street, or that whole area between Taylor Street, Scott Street, and North Washington Avenue. That was Clark's Creek, and it was all open, and all three streets, everybody just played all day long, and it was just a really, really great street to grow up on. I moved down to South Washington Avenue when I was in 6th grade. It was very traumatic because Taylor Street was really so great. But anyway, so for me, living on Taylor Street, I went downtown. If you lived on this side of the river, you went over town. And I think people think that's really strange, but that's the way it was. Anyway, as I left my house on Taylor Street and I went down Taylor Street to go downtown, the first place was the Briggs Lumber Company. And the Briggs Lumber Company, actually, it was the Church's Lumber Company. And then in 1949, they had just a really horrendous fire there. And I was talking today to Janet D'Angelo, who lived right across the street, and she said, and it says in a newspaper article, that the whole facility went down in 30 minutes because of all the paint and the lumber and all that type of thing. And several homes on the street were singed because the fire was so bad. But anyway, Mr. Church rebuilt it, and he sold it to the Briggs Lumber Company in the 50s. And then as you got onto North Washington Avenue and headed toward downtown, you ran into Stoney's gas station. And that was an Esso station. And I just remember as a kid, there was the man with the white hair, and then Adrian Sanford. He was a big guy. He worked there. And you drove your car up and you ran over the little rubber thing and it dinged, and he came out and he washed your windshield and he did gas, and it was just really neat, you know. And it was an Esso gas station, and it started there in 1936, and it was there till 1960 when they tore it down to make room for the new Victory Markets. But even when it was and then behind the gas station, there was this huge big barn, and I think that's where they kept their tow trucks and all that type of thing. And then way in the back of the gas station, toward the wall by Races, was Smalley's Theater. And Smalley's Theater came to Oxford in 1937. And then because it just couldn't support it, it went bankrupt in 1953. And that's when another Victory Market went in there. Across the street, of course, we all know, was the post office. The post office was started in 1938. The reason we have such a nice post office is because there was a man in Oxford, and his name was Jesse Jacobs. And Jesse Jacobs lived up on State Street, where the house where the Proskin farm was. And Jesse Jacobs was a friend of FDR when FDR was the governor. And so when FDR became president, and it was during the Depression, and they had all the monies they were spending on all the work projects, Oxford got a really nice post office.
By the way, Franklin and Eleanor stayed in that house when he was running for.
Yep. Yes, they stayed there a number of times. And a couple of years ago, when I went to Zeta White's funeral, her children had a note that FDR had written to Mr. Jacobs saying, you know, I really do like to come and visit you, but I love the food that this lady prepares. Because she used to cater the meals when FDR was governor, and he used to come to Jesse Jacobs' house. So anyway, I remember the post office. The thing I remember most about the post office was when you went in, on the left-hand wall, there was this huge glass case, and it had FBI Most Wanted. Remember that? It had all the wanted posters in it, and they pictures, and it had people's names on there. It had a lot of wanted posters in there. And then when you went outside, it had this hanging metal sign, and it was on a swing, and it had stuff like buy savings bonds or enlist in the army or something like that. And that was our post office. And then right next to the post office was the Oxford Inn. The Oxford Inn was founded in 1937 by Frances Cornelia, and she had it for many, many years. She got this, my husband and I were talking to her once, and she said she got the seed money for the Oxford Inn from Howard Huffman, who had his fingers in everything, and Earl Hand. She didn't have money to start it, but they did. And she said there were a lot of people in Oxford who liked to consume alcohol, but they didn't want it to be public. And even though these two men were connected with establishments that served food, they didn't really want it to be known that they served alcohol. So they gave her money to start a place that served alcohol so people would go there and have a drink. Anyway, so you crossed from the Oxford Inn to the other side of the street, and until the mid-40s, it was Clinton Street. It was not South Washington Avenue, it was Clinton Street. And when you cross the street across from the Oxford Inn, there was a bowling alley. And the bowling alley was built in 1928 by Joe Pasamato. And Joe Pasamato built that building for $10,000. And there were 4 alleys, and then upstairs was a meeting room and 2 meeting rooms, and then a big open area. And I can't remember who he sold it to, but the Grange rented the rooms out there for years and years and years.
Lawrence Blevin.
Okay, Lawrence Blevin, okay. And that's one of the places. Joe Pasamato also had his fingers in a lot of different things, but he built it. And then right next to that was the Zero Lacquer. The Zero Lacquer was constructed, or it was there, but it was started in 1943. And to this day, I have no idea what a Zero Lacquer is, but it was a Zero Lacquer. Freezers, okay. It was, so it was the freezers. And then in the 50s, a man by the name of Bill Barr from Norwich put a spread in. The whole corner there, as you're going around South Washington to Lafayette Park, was purchased in 1928 by a man from Norwich by the name of Frank Zuber. And he put a Texaco station there, and that was there for many years. And I don't know when the Texaco station ceased to exist, but in the late 50s, a man from Norwich by the name of Ted Samita bought that, and he put in a small dry cleaning place, and his wife ran a gift shop there for many years.
Right.
Okay, so you go around the corner, and then we all remember Emerson Day's Rexall store. Emerson Day bought that in 1939, but in 1929, Emerson Day and his uncle, a man by the name of Jones, had another store where the Six on the Square is now, and that was a drugstore that he and his uncle ran. And then in 1939, he bought the Rexall store from a man by the name of Slugger Loomis. And Slugger Loomis had bought that in 1939, and for 2 years, he had a candy and confectionery store there. But he sold it to Mr. Day in 1939, and Mr. Day ran it for many years. And then later he ran it with Bob Falston, who took over when Mr. Day passed away. Do you want to say something?
About in the upstairs, before the fire, the taffy slabs were still in the building.
Right, it was a certain kind of taffy, it was called ribbon taffy or something, that Slugger Loomis had in his confectionery store. It was something really different. But as a kid, that was one of my favorite stores, because you went in, and my babysitter in the 50s was somebody by the name of Louise Kelly, who was Mr. Day's niece. And Louise always made sure every day we went downtown to get the mail in the summer. And then we'd go to her store, and she'd open the door, and she'd say, "Hi, Uncle Emmy." And he'd say, "Hi, girls." He had kind of squeaky voice. He'd say, "Hi, girls." And he'd say, "How are you today?" And we'd say, "Fine." And if you remember the store, the right-hand side was a huge candy shelf. And he'd say, "Would you girls like some candy?" So every day, of course, we said, yes, we would like some candy. And every day, Louise would get a Zero bar. And then she would take it back to the house, and she'd stick a fork in it, and she'd put it in the freezer, and then she'd eat the frozen Zero bar. But every day, we went down to the Rexall store, and we had candy. It was great. And then next to it, of course, was the A&P. And the A&P was there until the fire, no, actually, it was there until just a few years before the fire, when it went a couple doors down to the Acme store. But the A&P was there for a lot of years. And if you remember, the A&P had everything, everything in the world. It was so crowded and so packed. You went in, and there was a huge coffee machine that was there. You always smelled the coffee. I kind of remember there was like a ladder that went around it, and if they couldn't get whatever you wanted with a hook, they climbed up the ladder. And Mr. Harvey worked there, and Mrs. Weisub, and Mrs. Cardner. Those are the three people I remember that worked there. And then next, and most people don't remember this, was a Grand Union. And the Grand Union was there from 1924 until 1954.
Right.
And then in 1954, the Grand Union went bankrupt, and a lady by the name of Julia Ellis from Norwich put in a woman's dress shop there. It was called the Style Shop. And she ran that. And I remember she was a very buxom woman, and she was like Oxford Sally Drazen, remember Drazen?
She was a teacher in Norwich.
And she would stand out front, and she smoked. I remember that. And then next door to the Style Shop was, it was almost like, it was one building, but it was two storefronts. And it was the American store for many, many years, and then the Acme store, and then the A&P store. But the American store first came in 1932, and it was and in 1945, it was the first grocery store in Shenango County to be self-serve, which meant it had carts. And that whole building was owned by a man by the name of Judson Harrison, and he was a harness maker. He had a business upstairs over the American store, and he sold insurance and harnesses. And also over the store, Treddy Place had a typewriter business, and there was a man named Albert Winters who sold insurance. Shaking head, you want all this, you know all this. And then the bank was built in 1894. She went in the bank on the left. You said hello to Zaricone, and he always gave you candy. And then the tellers that I remember there, I remember Paul Race was there, and Barbara Jean Race, and Rose Pano, and Mrs. Rosiski. Those are some of the people I remember there. And on the right, there was a man by the name of Walter Smith, and he had a jewelry store and he was an oculist. I don't know if he was actually an optometrist, but he sold glasses. And then upstairs in the bank, there was, Stratton had his law firm on the left side, and then on the right side, in the front, was Mackenzie Insurance. That was first Mr. Mackenzie, I didn't know, Mr. Mackenzie, and then Harold Mackenzie. And then also upstairs, Frank Ludi had a barber shop.
Mr. Bullock was up there.
Wayne Bullock had started a law firm up there in 1942. And Mackenzie, Mr. Mackenzie started his insurance office in 1948. Okay, you go around the corner and it was the Pasamato block. Mr. Pasamato had been in Oxford since 1919, but he bought that block in 1946. And the first store there, probably most of us remember, there was a barber shop there, but that wasn't the first store in the 50s. In the 50s, Richard Cooley from Norwich had a men and women's shoe store there. And he kept that shoe store there until 1955 when he moved over to another block. And then the next building, there was another building, and I really don't remember what was in there. I think like maybe a women's hairdresser place or something. And then Mr. Pasamato had his shoe store. And then there was a liquor store. And then, I was never in there, but Lulu Taylor had like a coffee shop. I think teenagers hung out there or something. You remember, Marjorie?
Oh, real well. We spent a lot of time there after school and on
Okay,
weekends.
she had like a coffee shop there for teenagers, and then there was like an auto parts store or something down at the end. Now, on the other side of South Canal Street, where the river is, there's a picture that's going around. And a lot of people don't remember what that looked like, but there was like, starting on the corner by Roma, there was the Oxford Review-Times building. It was a huge wooden structure. And then there was a tenements. There were Hackett's tenements. And then there were a couple houses. And then there was that barn that's there now that Ken Ryan, I think, uses for like feed or something like that. But anyway, in 1947, there was a huge fire and everything was destroyed. And it's only because the fire probably was in March and all the surrounding buildings were covered with snow. It said that probably that's why half of Oxford didn't burn down, because the snow was covering all the rooftops. But anyway, that was totally destroyed. So in 1948, a man by the name of Ed Jones bought the first lot there, and he put in a Rambler Willys Jeep in a garage type of thing. Ed Jones had come to Oxford in 1943, and for 5 years he was a farmer, and he had a big farm at the end of Green Street and Bradley Hill Road. And then he sold that in 1948 to the Butts family. But that's where Ed Jones started out. He came here from Delaware County. And then the lot right next to Ed Jones was John Shepler. And he had a number of businesses over on Pleasant Street, but he bought that specific business in 1948, and he put in, I think, did he have Hudson cars or something like that? He had cars there, and he stayed there until 1959, when he built a new facility up on Route 12 past the halfway house. Okay, Navy Island block, and this was the hardest thing in the absolute world to figure out, because everybody knows that Oxford had like 6 grocery stores, but where were they? And everybody knew that there were a whole bunch of them in that whole block there in Navy Island, but where were they? And so I talked to a lot of people, and people could remember one thing but not the other. But finally, something's going around, and it shows that block. And finally, we took that picture, and my husband put it on a computer, and he just zapped it and zapped it and zapped it. And the key was we didn't know where Wyckoff's was. And that was a grocery store. But Wyckoff's, we found out, was where most of us probably remember Mr. Potter having his store. But anyway, in the 50s, on the corner where Roma is now, there was a little telephone building, but that had just been taken down. And in 1950, a man by the name of, Castaldi, what was his name? Al Castaldi bought that building, and he had a television store in there. for a few years. And then Mrs. Harrison and Sharon, they had something there called the Snack Shop. And then right next door to the Snack Shop was a place called Oakwood Pharmacy. That was started in 1938 by a man named Paul Crawford. And I remember going in there a couple of times, but it was like the AMP, it was like wall-to-wall drugs, and it didn't have a lot of candy. So I didn't go back there. But anyway, Paul Crawford had that store until 1963. And then in 1963, he sold it to Brian Barlow. And Brian was there for a few years until he went where he is now.
Where Brian got his start?
Pardon me?
Where Brian got his start?
Yes, he did. He was like an assistant to
He
Mr.
worked
Crawford.
there in high school.
By the way, you lived on Taylor? Paul Crawford and his wife lived on Taylor, they gave great trick or treats.
They did what?
Treats. They gave great treats.
She always yelled at me because I roller skated on her lawn, so she was.
But he place had his store.
He had a place, yeah. At one time, he had his place on the corner. Yep.
Was behind it, where some of us worked, and that was when you would pull out plugs and people would call and ask for a number and he'd ring it.
Yeah, she knew where everybody was. Everybody reported to this lady, I can't remember what her name was. And she knew where everybody was. If you wanted to get a hold of her, she could tell you. Teddy Place had something there. Could be.
Yeah, in the end, Teddy had his, on the first block in the 40s.
Yep, okay. And then he also had someplace up where the Review Times was on North Washington Avenue. He moved a couple times. Okay, and then next was the Emerson Company, and the Emerson Company bought Carl Emerson, who was Dave Emerson, older Dave Emerson's father, bought that building in 1937 from Lynn Seymour. And Lynn Seymour and his father started a furniture and undertaking business there in 1918. And they had a funeral home and a furniture store there. And one of the questions I had was, well, how does that work? You know? So, where I got caught up was I was looking at the present building and thinking, how does that work? Because if you remember the Emerson's store, the door was on the right. So then I found out that back in the 30s, when Mr. Seymour had his business there, the door was in the middle. And so you walked in, and there was a furniture store on one side, and then there was a viewing room and the places for the the funeral business on the other side, and that's kind of how they worked that. But anyway, Emerson's bought it in 1937, and that eventually became a plumbing and heating business. And then next door was Wyckoff's. That was the mystery store that nobody could, they knew it was there someplace, but they didn't know where it was. But they started that in 1926 and continued it until the mid-50s when Mr. Potter went to the Navy Island block. And then next there was, where the Chinese restaurant just moved out of, a man by the name of Cyril Mayo had a barber shop there, and he started that in 1932. And he stayed there until 1955 when he went down to the Pasameda block. And Mr. Mayo had a barber shop there, but in the back was just like a kind of a big room, and that was the early, this is in the 50s, the Oxford Town Hall. And then it also had a single jail cell. And there were stories that there was maybe, I don't know the story, so I don't know if it's true. But there was actually didn't have a town cop at that time, but they had a constable. And there was a new constable, and they had a busy Saturday night, and he put someone in there and forgot about him until Monday morning. Whatever. But anyway, there was a jail cell there. And then what we remember as the Village Hall went there in 1953, because what that was before 1953 was the first Victory Markets. And then the Victory Markets went there in 1921. And then in 1953, when the Smalley's Theater went out of business, the Victory Market went over to where the Smalley's Theater was. And that became the Village Hall. And then right next to that, there was an IGA store run for many years by Oliver Manzer and his father. And then on the end, right there by the river bridge, there were two Maury brothers, and they had a little electric shop where I remember as a kid you go to pay your electric bill. And then one of the Maury brothers went to your house if your iron was broken or if your lamp was broken. And one of the Maurys did kind of electrical hostile type things. So that was that block.
Where was
Okay.
Zilpha moved over there?
Zilpha moved there in the late 50s, and she went where the barber shop was. I think she went there when the barber shop went down to Pasamatos.
So it was on the right-hand side of that where?
Yes, where the Chinese restaurant was, yeah. She was there when they had the big fire in 1961.
Did she buy the style shop that was in Lafayette?
No, the style shop went down around the corner in the Pasamato block for a while.
Oh, okay.
And then upstairs over the whole Navy Island block, Dr. Mayhew had his offices, and the lodge was there, and somebody else told me there were some apartments up there too.
Yes.
Okay. The other side of the street was really simple. We had the Martin Supply Company, we had Paul O'Connor had a bar and grill, and then there were two storefronts that were Preston Hardware. Preston Hardware bought it from Stratton Hardware in 1928. And I remember going there as a kid in Preston Hardware, and there was I thought of everybody as old, but there was a young guy, a younger man in Preston Hardware selling color televisions. It was Don Howard.
Not so young anymore.
Okay, and then after Preston Hardware, there were two storefronts. There was Cooper Hardware. Cooper Hardware was purchased from the Burchards in 1947. It was there all during the 50s. And in 1952, they opened the Good Luck Lake, the indoor fishing place. And he had something there called the Handlebar Shop. And it was like known all over the country because it was a handle for anything that needed a handle.
So somebody could write a book just about the Cooper Hardware. They were so innovative and inventive. They were known all over the country.
Yep, yep. And then and then in 1951, Mr. and Mrs. Cronk bought the wallpaper and paint store. And then you had Jude O'Connor's Tavern. And then Mr. Munyon, and he had a number of partners, but Mr. Munyon, Clarence Munyon, bought the Munyon's Men's Shop in 1935, and he kept it until 1963. In 1963, he became the welfare commissioner, and he had to live up at what's now Preston Manor, so he sold it. And who did he sell it to?
Kozlowski.
Kozlowski, Mr. Kozlowski. Yep. Then you go down the corner, up North Canal Street, and North Canal Street until the 40s was called Baldwin Avenue. And you had Moore's Bakery and Groceries, and that was started in the 20s. And it was a bakery and groceries, and then Mr. Moore died in 1954, and they had like 3 trucks that went all over delivering groceries to people. But after Mr. Moore died, Mrs. Moore just had the bakery business. And then right next to Moore's was the Atlantic Station run by Mr. Brooke. That's all I got there. And then, last but not least, Lafayette Park. And, well, a lot of people don't remember, and I don't know who owned it, was if you think of where Hoppy's is now, and that stairway that goes up the side of the building, underneath there was just like a little coffee shop type thing with stands. It was like a newspaper stand, and the bus stopped there, and it was a taxi stand. But I don't know who owned
Winter
it.
was the taxi.
Henry Weaver's television and radio.
Oh, winter?
Saul Winter. Saul Winter.
Those are really, I don't think
Eddie Winter's father.
Okay. Anyway, that was there. And then in most of the 50s, what is now Hoppy's was Carlin's Bar. DK. Okay. And then next to that, the store that is now the Blue Lamp. From like the 20s until 1949. It was owned by people who had like a variety store there. It was owned by people, a lady by the name of Mrs. Gibbon, and then it was owned by Gaylords, and then it was owned by Mr. and Mrs. Potter. They bought it in 1949. And then for whatever reason, in the 50s, Mr. and Mrs. Potter moved over to the Navy Island block. And then right next to it, where 6 on the Square is now, Zilpha Bowers had a dress shop. And Zilpha Bowers started out in 1948, in this article I read. It said she started out from a shop in her home on Washington Park.
Yeah, which is not
And
the Bible.
the only thing we could figure out was on Washington Park where Bidas is now, a relative of hers by the name of Scarlett lived. So maybe that's where she started out having her store.
Verna Scarlett and Zilpha were sisters.
Right.
So maybe that's where Zilpha started out her
One of
shop.
them lived on one side and one of
Okay.
them lived on the other.
But that's where she started her shop, and then she moved to where 6 on the Square is now. And a lot of people can remember that she had her store in the front, but in the back, Evelyn Carroll had like 2 or 3 hairdressing little seats or something. And Evelyn Carroll had a business there. And then in the 50s, Evelyn Carroll moved to her shop to her home up on Taylor Street. Okay, and then where the flower shop just went out of business, there's always been like a coffee shop there.
No, right.
Central Restaurant, that's what it's called, the Central Restaurant, yep. And then next to that, from 1925 until the mid-50s, the next store is where Bartles is now on the right. Earl Hodgkin had all sorts of a clothing
Dry
store
goods.
there. And then on the, what you think of as the left of Bartles, that's where it was in the early 50s, it was a barber shop. And then that's where Mr. Cooley moved when he left Casamado Block in 55, and he had a place called the Sis and Sonny Shop. Okay. And then the next place, which would be the right-hand part of Chubb's, a man from the 20s until 1961 by the name of George Armitage, had a jewelry store there. And then at one time there was also a hat place. A lady had a hat store.
Next door.
Okay, next door. And then, of course, on the end was the corner shop. And if you tried the history of that store, I mean, Howard Huffman owned it, and then he sold it, and then he owned it, and he sold it. It was owned by a couple of Hinkley's. It was owned by a guy from Norwich. It was owned by a McGarity from Norwich who had an ice cream shop. It just had all sorts of owners. But if you remember hobbies, it had everything. It had magazines, it had food, it had soda, it had popcorn, it had dry cleaning. It just had everything. A lot of candy. A big nut machine, cards in the back, cigarette machines, it had a telephone booth, yep.
If you went to go to the bathroom, you'd squeeze your thigh. You sat at a big desk in the bathroom.
Well, the women's bathroom, you had to go in another room. And although George Armitage had a jewelry store next door, Howard Huffman in the 40s bought the back half of that store. So if you had to go to the bathroom and you went to Hobbies, you had to go past his desk. But then you had to go through the dry cleaning thing. Remember all those dry cleaning things you had to go through? And he had everything. And Mr. Huffman he was involved in the store, he was involved in the feed and fuel, he was involved in the egg business, he was the first manager of Smalley's, he was the manager of the Opera House when it was on the corner. Mr. Huffman was involved he was a town clerk, he was everything. And then as you went up North Washington Avenue, in back of the corner shop was the Review Times. And the Review Times moved there in 48 when they got burned out of the block that I told you burned down, and it burned everything. And the Review Times had, Stafford was the owner for a lot of years. I just remember as a kid, it was a huge building, and it had a huge window, and it had a huge machine, and you went by there, and Grace Royce was sitting there typing in this huge clunky machine. And then right next to right in back of the Review Times was a veterinarian by the name of Dr. Jones, who came to Oxford in 1913. So he was there a lot of years. And then right across the street in that big old barn that's still there, half fallen down, that was always owned by the Hovey family. But in the 40s, Mr. Hovey sold it to, I can't remember his first name, Mr. McEnany, that lived down on the East River Road. And he had like a farm implement business there. And he sold it in 1950 to a man by the name of George Lougheed. And George Lougheed had it from 50 to 54. And then George Lougheed in 1954 got a Ford tractor franchise. So he moved the business down to North Canal Street. The building's still there, but it has like a, you could see, you'd be able to see the tractors and stuff like that. Rick Payton lives upstairs, but that's where he moved. Okay, so that's kind of my tour of Oxford.
I'll tell you right from the start, you've got a lot better memory than I do. Last year I started doing a story on my dad's trucking business in the late 30s and 40s. And as I finished that up, one day I started making a map, trying to think of the way I remembered it. This was in the 40s. And I haven't got a whole lot to add to what she's said, other than Church's Lumber was a real good friend of my dad's. And my dad, all the lumber used to come in on the railroad. And my dad trucked all the lumber from the railroad over to Morris Church's. And then Morris Church lived up on Scott Street. And there's a big lawn right next to their house. And that used to be an apartment house there. It was a 3-story apartment house. And he wanted it, Leitra didn't like looking out at that apartment house, so she wanted him to tear it down. So he made a deal with my dad, and I've recently found the contract. And it was a 3-story apartment house. And my dad had a year to tear it down and remove everything and add, including the furnace, to make sure that was gone. So my dad had a year to tear it down, and the contract was for $1. And I was about 3 or 4 years old at the time, and I remember going over and Dad tore it all down, and I mean, we used lumber from that house for years afterwards. He stuck up all the lumber, and one funny thing is that when I was over there one day, he had scaffolding around up on the 3rd floor, and I was sitting out on the scaffolding, and Leitra Church looked out and saw me up on the scaffolding, and called my mother. We lived on Mechanic Street. I think my mother was on a dead run all the way. She took me home, and I'll tell you, my dad got a talking. Gordon Gibson's barbershop. There's some of these I found out are raw. I just kind of put it down as what I remembered, and there's a few things you'll see here that I didn't have in the right place. But Gordon Gibson had a barbershop, and Ernie Johnson worked for him. And Ernie Johnson is Peg Seiler's stepfather. And then he opened a sawmill up in Sealy, and they moved up there. I think about the time Peggy graduated. Carlin's Grill, that was a wild place. And there was a story, it was a true story, I remember when it happened. That they opened up the front door and a guy, some of the winners and those guys all used to ride their horse down. So somebody dared them to ride the horse in the front door, have a beer at the bar, and then go on out the side door. And it really did happen. And the bowling alley, the Lawrence Bliven bought that sometime in the 40s, I think. And he processed milk on the Bliven farm, had a processing plant up there. And so he ran his milk distribution out of there and served ice cream. And he didn't have a great long time. The Zero Locker was the most popular place in town. Nobody had freezers in their homes. And we lived on Mechanic Street, and if my mother wanted to get something out of the freezer, she had to walk over town and take something out of the freezer. And every woman in town, I mean, there was probably 80, 90 lockers in there. And it was great for the kids, because we could go in there and it was below freezing. It wasn't cold. But it was kind of fun to get in there.
It's like individual compartments.
Yeah, they pulled out their big trays, and they
You had a key.
Yeah, you had your own key. Yeah.
When I was a kid, I lived up on what's now called the Hotel. And my dad used to slaughter cows and pigs and stuff, and that's where we brought them.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that sticks on my mind about Oxford, is the Zero Locker.
It was, I mean, every family in town had a locker, some size.
Yeah.
You get different sizes, but they were just pull out trays.
What year was that?
That was all through the 40s, probably till the early 50s. The gas station here had a canopy out over it, and you could drive under on one side of the pumps. Ed Harrison's, I didn't have that. That was upstairs, and that was a pretty neat place. He made anything leather. He was a leather worker. He was Mary L. Emerson's grandfather, and Judd Harrison. And he was a very well thought of man in town, but he, particularly with the rural people, because he made beautiful harnesses.
Where was that, Bob? Exactly where was this store?
It was up over Acme or AMP. It was on the
Okay,
second
all right.
floor.
Okay, that store goes way back. All
It
right.
was over the Acme, and Tread Place had his typewriter place up there, and Dick Boston worked for him.
Okay. Lulu Taylor's was a great place for everybody to go. Pasamato Joe, in fact, I was kind of partial to Joe, and he and my dad used to go hunting together. And when I always admired his safe, and it, a fairly decent sized safe. And it had Joe Pasamato and the years on it. And when he quit business, he gave that safe to my dad for me to have. So I've got the safe built in our back room and sunroom with Joe Pasamato.
But his first place was on the corner by Roma's. And he had a lemon tree in the window.
That's right.
That's where he was first, before he went down the street.
Dick Cooley started working for Munyon's. And he kinda ran the shoe store, a part of Munyon's, and then he went over and opened up the store there. I remember Tread Place's typewriter is on the very corner. And it was torn down on Route 12 when they opened up, and South Canal Street and North Canal Street were both dead ends.
Yeah, right, right.
And there was a family down here, you go down through the brush, growing up really high. I used to scare the tar out of him. But he bought newspapers, so we had newspaper collections, so, you know, we walked down through there, and that place was, I mean, it was all grown up and trash all over, and it was a wild place. But that was what was at the end there. And on the other end, the village dump, or the town dump was right there where the village well is. And there was a guy around town that used to pick up garbage. And I've written it down, I can never remember, but he had a hand cart. And he'd pick up garbage from Jutes and Paul O'Connor's and about 4 or 5 businesses, and then he would take the garbage up to the dump. Well, every 3 or 4 years, he needed money, so he'd sell my dad his garbage business. So Dad would give him $20 for his garbage. Dad would pick up the garbage for a week, and then he'd be back. But he was a kind of a character around town. There was also a gas station and car dealership here before the Review Times moved over there in the 40s.
It was called Grobins or something, and Barney Rooney rented it, and then Barney Rooney Grogan sold it to the Review Times, and Barney Rooney went down where we went.
Shepherd's. Orrin Rumsey had a store, grocery store, right beside Manzer's. And Manzer's was the IGA, and then Rumsey's, Orrin Rumsey had that store there.
It was a victory.
And on this map, I kind of went across the bridge, and Wallace's Deli, and that's where at least all the guys my age when we were in school always went over there to eat lunch.
Along the river that you weren't supposed to use.
Yeah.
Walking along the river.
Yeah.
Behind the gun store.
Yeah, back to the library. Also underneath the fire station, well, then there was some stores here on the corner, and I remember an antique shop on the floor level, on the street level. But then there was also, I remember there was one barber shop for a while down, you went down into the bottom story. And then underneath the fire station was a blacksmith shop. And I can remember bringing our horses up there to get shoes. And there was also Sol's blacksmith shop back of the theater. Back of Victory now. It was kind of under the house where that long driveway comes back.
Was there a livery stable further up north of Washington? Was there something further up north of Washington as well?
By the Opera House. Where's everything?
I don't remember.
Buildings behind. Yeah, the big libraries.
Moore's Bakery, that was a really neat place in the stone building.
By the way, I got the clock, got it out there.
And so he he was a wheeler dealer, and he had a poultry, 3-story poultry house where the Methodist church is. And his brother Judy Moore, who was kind of a character around town, and he took care of the poultry business. And Don also had a slaughterhouse on Green Street, back of Dick Pinch's. The building is still up there, and until recently, I think your brother Tim got some of the track and stuff out of there, but that was, and the story was that during the war, he did a lot of black market beef up in that barn. He was a character, but he did it whatever he needed to do.
That was a good bakery.
So I think that's, I just kind of wanted to get that stuff down.
If you don't mind, I want to just stand over here because you're starting to sneak over on the east side a little bit there, east side of town.
Yeah.
But these are both great, and we'll get back to them. But people in the audience, you know, you're supposed to join in here. So if you do have a question or a comment, I guess we'll ask for a little raise of hand. But speak up, would you please, so other people can hear your question. Starting right with Louise here.
If Canal Street was dead end on both ends.
Route 12 was
Route
Washington.
12, that was Washington then? Okay. I was worried either that or River Road went through town.
North and south Washington.
Oh, where did it go after,
Going north, it came right out where it does now on,
where Route 12 is now?
and the south,
Same
south,
thing.
yeah, either way down or you could cut off
That's because you
there by, well,
Back here.
And up on North Washington, when it was 12, there was an ice house up there.
yeah, right on the corner
They
Where-
delivered ice.
where Moravito's were
That's it, right
was
there.
Danny Bartle's. He was mainly known as a coal dealer. And Brian, or Neil Bartle worked there all through high school, and his dad worked there for his brother Danny for probably 40 years.
There are other people in the room who know him well, and I'll tell you, you can write a book about him too. From hard work, from a kid, 14, 15, nothing, just hard work up to a businessman who would sell the business at a good price.
That was one of my dad's business. One of my dad's businesses was delivering ice
Yeah.
around
See,
town.
that was
And he got-
a real transition
he got
from the
the
old
ice.
Brooks Pond ice to when they could actually make it over town. And, the back, the young lady in the back.
This is kind of a general question, because I've never seen an active ice box. But do I take it that you could only keep food cold, you couldn't freeze it? Is that why they had the freezer? Oh,
My dad was an Esso dealer, and he eventually became Blue Hawk. It was his Esso business, and he delivered kerosene on Saturday mornings. And he also, in the front, had a big heavy canvas and ice, and when he was he'd deliver kerosene or chip off and they used to put a sign in the window if they needed ice. And so
We
he
have one
knew,
over the museum, a little red sign with it, and,
he knew what size ice box they did, so he'd chip off the right size.
I just want to, you're next here, and I just want to, at this point, interrupt to the point to say that the Shenango County Historical Society is about to publish its second journal of stories written around the county. And one of the stories in there is written by Bob about his father. And I've read it, it's a very interesting story. So when that hits the stands here in about, sometime this summer, I'm not kidding, read that story, you'll learn a lot more about Oxford. And it's also just a story of hard work and inventiveness, looking for the opportunities. So, Harold.
Does anyone that's here remember a Mr. Wilcox on North Canal?
Yeah.
Harry Wilcox.
I was gonna put it down, but I couldn't remember his name. He had a little shack right by where the creek, right beside the creek. And he was a putter, and he had piles of stuff. But he could fix anything. And if you needed a chunk of steel or whatever, whatever you needed, but I couldn't remember his name.
What was it?
Mr. Wilcox.
Right here.
Are there any stories about Cyrus Tunnel? Cyrus Tunnel, that building?
It was before me.
That goes back, that's built out of stone for
Right.
the canal building days. And, if I were gonna look it up, I would start with the annals of Oxford. And if I can't find anything, I'd go to my town historian who can find out anything. So, here, right.
We have an icebox.
Lots of people have ice boxes.
I mean, a real icebox, it's down in our cellar.
Yep.
It's got 3 doors on it, put the ice up on the top.
How many people remember ice boxes? All right. All right. You know what? I've been looking for a good one. I want to use it for a wine cellar.
That's all for the hard parts of the nail.
Well, that's what they're talking about. But he would know because there were different sizes. We had one that took a really big block and lifted up the top and put it in. And some of them weren't so big. But these guys would always know after on their roots. They'd look for the sign in the window. Gotta be more comments. I'm a newcomer, but I'm aching to say a couple of things about some people I first knew in Oxford. And some of the first people I knew in Oxford were Bob, like the first few days I got here in 1964, Bob Foulson, Slugger Loomis, and those two guys were not alike at all. They were both great people to know, believe me. Jim Hayden, who lived behind, because we rented from Slugger Loomis up there, and Charlie Burke. Now, I'll tell you, Charlie Burke, you mentioned him, the Texaco station there. And I don't know if you ever noticed or not, but he was missing a pinky, okay? So, he was just a nice guy. I used to walk against her and so on, but sort of wondered about the pinky. A woman came in one day, steaming in the car, and it was the radiator hose. So, okay, shut it off and let it out, let it cool off. So he's in there just fitting the clamps on the radiator hose. And he said, so he shouts to the woman, "Don't start your engine." And she said, "What?" He said, "Don't start your engine." And that's the last time he ever saw his pinky. Start your engine. He didn't even go home. He went in, didn't even try to retrieve it. That thing was shot. But he went in, bandaged it up and so on, and worked through the day. That's the kind of guy he was. Another tough old guy, worked his way. And you meet some of these people. Yes, Bart.
Forgot to mention that Slugger Loomis had a funeral home.
That's right. He knew the business. He had a certificate. Yeah.
And his is one of the 2 houses in the village that has the door on the side of the house.
Where was it?
Yeah.
In the,
You want a sense of humor. He and Pop Souders were good friends, and they had male senses of humor. So Frank Souders came to school one day, pulled the door open right over here, had a heart attack. Bam, he's out. In those days, he was in bed for about 6 weeks. So he's lying there, and Lita had him propped up by the window so he could see. And so Slugger, as a little joke, comes in, and he's got it in his car, and he's got a jar of embalming fluid. He's going, that was a sense of humor that they were. So they were great people. I just want to mention that there is a book about this Jerry Zuber, the guy from
Frank
Zuber, and you're going to be hearing more about that. And you could also write a book about Howard Hoffman. Someone could. He was much more, even though you both mentioned him, he was just quite a guy. I mean, Hoppy's now is known all over the country. Hoppy's store is known really all over the country. And the Cooper Hardware. Someone could write a story about that. And I want to mention this, spend some time, the people who don't know about this fire here, that was a bad night in Oxford. And a fellow who was the town cop, or the village cop here, wanted to be here on any night we ever did that. He called me about 6 months ago, Fred, if you do that, because he told me the story, he was a cop, and he was a trooper standing by where Romas is now, talking, looking around. I said, you probably having donuts and coffee. No, we were just talking. And he lives in Vestal. And so they noticed some fog. You know how the fog will sort of waft up a street? You know, I said, boy, fog's coming early tonight. You know, that's not fog. So one of them ran down, and so they got early response though by those guys staying there. And he lives in Vestal, and he gave me his phone number, but it's not. I assume the guy has taken on a cell phone. But I know where he lives. I was down at his house yesterday. He wasn't home. He lives at 263 Old Vestal Highway, or Old Vestal Road.
What's his name?
In Vestal. But, go ahead.
Saturday night of that fire, all of the firemen and their wives were over to school for a banquet for Howard Bartlett. And then we went.
There's a book too.
We went over to Howard's house. He lived across from where the tennis court was.
Yep.
We were there. We had just got inside his house when the fire whistle went off. Now all these firemen had just gone through town, and like you said, it was
You know what?
Friday.
Except for those coincidences, that bank building might have been destroyed that night. You know, it wouldn't. But
Yeah, and all the firemen actually they were all dressed up in their suits and stuff, and all their suits got ruined.
oh yeah.
Yeah, and my husband was over a oil tank in the back of the building. I mean, it was a bad fire.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Also, I want you to notice this picture here. This is back before the 50s. A lot of people don't realize that that old-fashioned looking building there on the left, that's a Sullivan building. It's a building you knew as a Pesomedo building, because it was moved around the corner when they built a bank.
Yeah.
Okay? And that leather shop was always right there for years, in that next building there. And so I think you're looking right across the fountain there. So.
Something about, there was some scandal or something about them moving that because part of it was under the street.
I don't know that.
What?
Yeah, the first
Couldn't
story-
hear it.
The first story was down, and you can see it in the picture, that there was a walkway, stairs down to the.
Yeah, it says that southern architecture.
They raised it up, I believe.
Yeah, okay, I didn't know it was a scandal, but then like that southern architecture, where you get your first floor is actually partly down, where you used to have your basement apartments and so on. So at any rate, I just want people to notice that they're here, and I can tell you something about Barron's Bar. I'm a newcomer, okay, I don't know so many people know, but Barron's Bar was owned by Ed and Lee Barron. They just sold it a year or two. We bought our house from them. Okay, they were all right. Eddie had a college degree from Colgate, but I guess you knew. I know you knew him. At any rate, the story out in their neighborhood. I mean, they told us the story. Told my wife the story. They had an argument in the kitchen one day. She went in the other room, got the pistol, and shot him. And she was going to shoot him again, but he ran out of the house. So he's over on the lawn, thinking he's dying. And they called the ambulance. Jeffords, the ambulance come out. And so Jeffords thinks he's bad. There's a bullet. And but by now they've sort of patched up their argument, and they don't want this to go any farther. And so Eddie said, "I'll be all right." So he goes back, and that was it. I don't know if they ever got the bullet out or what. I mean, this town is full of interesting people and great stories. And for example, you didn't mention that you mentioned this slide there, the winners and so on, but there was a poker game there that was pretty much known one end of the county too. Were you aware of that? Okay. That was about maybe the best known poker game in the county. And I'm not, did you fill in or not? But,
No, yeah,
okay.
I remember
Yeah.
the other one they used to have out in that little building behind the Oxford Inn. They used to play cards,
Yeah.
have poker games out and that.
They used to have cockfights.
A busy place, a lively place, you know. And there are a lot of stories in here that haven't come up. I know some faces here. So, thing I do want to mention, it's off the side a little bit, but Vicki House has brought some very interesting photographs tonight. So spend some time over there, even if you have to wait in line. And because she's got some very interesting photos there. And take a look at that and spend some time looking at this fire here, that when that block went down. And there's some newspaper accounts here and so on. And but stick around, don't leave. Any last chance for questions or comments? Okay.
Fred, if you wanted to take 10 minutes, I could read that thing on my dad. If you wanted.
I wanted to wait for the book, because we want to sell the book. Joan, you could have you seen it?
It's a hype up in
Of his articles, got in the new book.
I wish you would.
Yeah, then we've got cheapskates over here want to hear it. I'm just telling you, it's a very interesting, engrossing story of the different just entrepreneurial activities that his dad had, that mainly with that truck.
Read the first paragraph.
Yeah, I was gonna say a teaser.
No, we're not reading that.
Not even a teaser?
Sorry, I brought it up.
Just a teaser? A little teaser. Like they do on TV. They give you just a little bit, just to like make you wanna
We
know.
have wetted them enough.
enough teasers already.
There's somebody else who's writing a book on his life. Harold? Harold?
Oh, Harold?
Harold?
All right. I'll tell you, just looking around this room, you know how you know people, and you know them for years, and you think you know them, and you find out, this guy's got a whole other skill or something, and this guy, if you get into comic books, and you might, and collectors, this guy knows his comic books. These guys, they go to these shows and so on, and they know all the Marvel comics. I'm not a comic book, but this guy knows them. He'll know whether it's worth 10 cents or $10 or $100. He's really, I'd say, an expert on in that field. So, and he was a baseball player. I didn't know that. Look at him. He was a baseball player. He was a good baseball player. That was a few years ago. But that's just one person. And Jerry Locke, I could tell stories about too. Just for example, so he was a Section 4 wrestling champion. Did you know that? Maybe you forgot that. You think it was a science teacher or Section 4. Yeah, I know that, but still, last chance for. Okay, we're going to give, if you don't mind, a great round of applause to both of you. There is a cold, what do you call it, iced tea and lemonade mixed coming up, and there's cold lemonade, and there's a variety of food. Take your time, talk to each other, talk to these people, look these things over, okay? The first one out of the window is rotten egg.
How are you guys?
My